Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad I'm here. Are you glad you're here? Yes. I want to tell you about a month ago. About a month ago, it was around January 1st. I put on a pair of jeans that I couldn't quite button, and I said, "That's it. I have had enough." It probably was all the bonbons I ate over the holidays. I don't know, all that good eating, but I needed to have some clothes that fit. And so I thought to myself, I've had enough. I'm going to do something about this. So I went and I joined Weight Watchers. I joined Weight Watchers. Anybody know about Weight Watchers? Now, okay, Weight Watchers, how it works is Weight Watchers gives everything that you eat a point value. The point being that everything you like to eat has a very, very high point value, and everything you don't like to eat has a very, very low point value. And so my morning coffee with all the cream and all the sugar and all the flavors and everything that I put in it makes up half the point value that I'm allowed for the day, which leaves me to eat one spring roll and a glass of water for the rest of the day. Now, I have an app on my phone. It's the Weight Watchers app, and I use it. And I put everything I eat into my phone, and my phone tells me how wrong I am about everything I'm eating. My app is the Truthteller. It says, "You will never get into those jeans doing that, sister." That's what my app tells me. The truth hurts, right? The truth hurts. I'm thinking about buying one of those scales. You know, the scales that talk to you when you step on it, tells you what the weight is. I'm thinking about that, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid that when I step on it, it's going to say, "One person at a time, please." No one likes truth tellers. Who likes to be told that they're wrong all the time, right? No. But yet there's all kinds of truth tellers in our life. We see them every day. There's doctors and there's teachers, police officers are truth tellers, right? Nobody wants to get a bad report from the doctor. Nobody wants to get a D on a test. Nobody likes the truth of getting a speeding ticket, right? But on the other hand, we also don't want to have a heart attack. We also don't want to not get the kind of education that we need to get a job. We also don't want to hurt somebody in an accident while we're speeding, right? No, truth tellers are necessary, even though we don't like them. Because the fact is, if we want to grow into people who follow Jesus wholeheartedly, we're just going to need to trust someone to speak truth. And sometimes that's painful truth into our lives. In this last week of the series of messages, Circle Up, we're going to add another category of relationships to all the relationships we've already talked about in the past weeks. We're going to add a category of relationships we need in our life, and that category is called truth tellers. We need truth tellers. Truth tellers are those people who we can trust to get us unstuck, to help us change what needs to be changing as we follow Jesus in our lives. Anybody ever feel stuck in your faith life? Come on. Yes, me too. I have felt stuck. Anybody who has felt stuck in their faith life, in a rut, is going to like to hear about today, because today we're going to hear about some truth tellers from the Bible, and we're going to hear about some truth tellers from everyday life who loved their friends so much that they told them the truth about themselves and helped to pry them out of the rut that they were in their faith and helped to get them back on the right road. In the Bible, the prophet Nathan was a truth teller like this for David. David was a shepherd boy. He became king of Israel, and we've been talking about him for several weeks now in this series, right? God loved David. David was a man after God's own heart. David loved God. People loved David because David was a good, good king. But David, like us sometimes, found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing with the wrong people. Can I get a yeah? Oh, yeah, I can relate. In fact, in the book of 2 Samuel, we read that in the spring of that year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent other people out to war, and he stayed behind in Jerusalem. And I'm here to tell you that David should have gone out to war, because what he ended up doing was one day he was strolling along his balcony, and he saw across the way a married woman by the name of Bathsheba taking a bath. Well, for David, the words that James wrote centuries later would be true for him. And you know what? They're true for us too. Let's read them together. It's on the screen. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. Now, I'll tell you, it wasn't that first look at Bathsheba that took David down, right? Oh, no. No. You can't help to see what you see sometimes. But it's that second lingering look, right? Now, that's the one where sin begins. Can I get a witness up in here, please? Because think about it. By this point, David, he's killed a giant. He's become the king. He has this huge army. He's very rich. I can imagine what he would be thinking, can't you? He could be thinking, he's looking, and he's saying, I'm the king. I can have anything I want. And I want this woman, married or not. So I think I'll go and get her. And so he does. Well, to make a long story short, Bathsheba ends up pregnant by David. Now this potential kingdom scandal is brewing because Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, is off fighting King David's war, the same war that David should have been fighting instead of strolling around on balconies, right? And David has to do something about this because now, what is he going to do? So he decides that he will take Uriah and send him to the front lines of the battle where Uriah will get quickly killed. And then, as though laziness and coveting and adultery and murder isn't enough, David tries to cover it all up. He just marries Bathsheba. The baby is his. The baby gets born. All the ends are tied up. Everything's good. No scandal. Everything happy again, right? Well, not so much. Not so much. Now, you know what they say around here in recovery programs, right? You're only as sick as your secrets. And David, this man after God's own heart, has obviously gotten way off track. David in one day has broken all 10 of the commandments. And that's when the prophet Nathan, the truth-teller, enters in. You know, in this series, Circle Up, we've seen that David had many relationships. He had his small group of mighty men. David also had a mentor named Samuel. David had a trusted soulmate named Jonathan. And now, part of what makes David really a man after God's own heart is that he had a fourth relationship. He had a truth teller named Nathan. And so Nathan comes to David, and in the midst of all of this chaos, and he says, David, let me tell you a little story. Just note to self, okay? If somebody comes up to you, your friend, and says, let me tell you a little story, be afraid. Be very, very afraid. My husband, he comes up to me and says, honey, come on, sit right down right here. Let me tell you a story. I am out shopping. I am leaving to go shopping right then. So Nathan says, let me tell you a story. Once there was a simple, poor man who had a pet lamb that he loved very, very much. And then there was a rich man who wanted some lamb stew. And so the rich man took the poor man's beloved pet and killed it and ate it, even though the rich man had plenty of his own lambs there to choose from. So what do you think about a man like that, David? What do you think about a guy like that? And David is outraged. He's outraged. He says, a man like that ought to be strung up. There's no punishment too bad for a guy like that. And then Nathan delivers the final blow. This is what he says to David. Read it with me on the screen. Then Nathan said to David, you are that man. Now Nathan does not say to David, you demand. You demand, David, you the king. No, David's used to hearing you demand. He's used to hearing, oh, King Saul has killed his thousands, King David his tens of thousands. David has heard a lot of you demand, but that is not what Nathan is saying to David. He is saying, you are that man. Totally different implication. Nathan calls David out. You are that man. That man that had all the power, took another man's wife. You are that man that sent your good soldier Uriah to the front lines to get him killed. You are that man who did it just for your own pleasure. You are that man, David. You are not the man you think you are. And it's only then that David sees what he's become. And David cries out to the Lord. The veil of self-deception is lifted from David. You know, David wrote about his sorrow in Psalm 51, 3 and 4. Can you read it with me? For I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. Against you and you alone have I sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight. See, David becomes willing to face his consequences. And so the healing of his relationship with God and with himself and with other people begins right there for David. Nathan, the truth teller, gets David back on track. But you know, most of us here today probably haven't broken all 10 of the commandments in one day, right? One at a time on different days, yeah. But not 10 all in one day. So I know for me, it's easy to say, this is a great story, Arlene. I loved it. It's good, but I'm not a murderer like David was. And so all this truth-telling stuff, maybe it doesn't apply to me. Nathan called David out on something far worse than anything I ever do in my everyday life. And you know what? Hopefully that's true. I hope that that is all true. I pray that that is indeed true. But on the other hand, I can look at a guy like, say, Peter, one of Jesus' 12 disciples. After Jesus went back to heaven, Peter was boldly going about preaching the love of Jesus with everyone. And everyone included the non-Jews called the Gentiles. Now, the Gentiles were the people that the Jews didn't like because the Gentiles were unclean. Now, when Peter's fellow Jews weren't around, Peter would eat and buddy up with the Gentiles. But when Peter's friend, the Jews, came around, Peter would snub the Gentiles and wouldn't eat with them anymore. He was, well, a hypocrite. He was a hypocrite. But Peter had a truth teller named the Apostle Paul in his life. And here's how Paul helped Peter in Paul's own words. We read them in Galatians 2:11. Let's read it together. But when Peter came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. What he did was what? Very wrong. Ouch, right? Whew! Paul just calls Peter right out on his hypocrisy. Peter, hypocrisy is just plain wrong. Just plain wrong. And hypocrisy, doesn't that hit a little closer to home? Right? It does for me. Because sometimes I want to believe that there's like degrees of sin, where some are worse sins, they're the really bad sins, and some are better sins. And of course, the sins that I commit are always like sort of in the category of being like the better sins rather than the worse ones. I mean, I may not be Mother Teresa, I may not be Billy Graham, but I'm certainly not Charles Manson or Adolf Hitler, right? I want to think that my little sins, like gossip, or white lies, or attention-seeking, criticism, impatience, that they don't make me as far from God as the really bad folks who do really big sins. But here's what C.S. Lewis says about my thinking in his book, Mere Christianity. He says, the sins of the flesh are bad, but they're the least bad of all sins. All the worst pleasures are purely spiritual. Pleasure of putting other people in the wrong, of bossing and patronizing and spoiling sport and backbiting, and the pleasures of power, of hatred. For there are two things inside of me, competing with the human self, which I must try to become. They are the animal self and the diabolical self. And the diabolical self is the worst of the two. And that is why a cold, self-righteous prig who goes regularly to church may be far nearer to hell than a prostitute. But of course, it's better to be neither. Well, C.S., why don't you just say what you mean, right? Don't hold back. C.S. is a truth teller for us today. Can everyone say yes? And maybe C.S. is helping us to answer the question for today, and it's this. Why do I want a truth teller? Why do I want a truth teller? See, King David had sins of the flesh that'll kill you from the outside in. Peter had sins of the spirit that'll kill you from the inside out. Nothing but death comes from either one. And yet, Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Freedom sounds wonderful. Now there's a word I like. Freedom sounds wonderful. It's delicious. It's so freeing. It's refreshing. It's wonderful. And I love the idea of being free from the chains that bind me, the chains of sin. And I long for that freedom. But here's my deal. I can't ask God for help for shortcomings in myself that I don't recognize. And so I'm going to need truth tellers in my life to tell me what I'm missing, which is the only way I'm going to break those chains that keep me far from God. So Jesus wants to set you free, wants to set me free with his grace and his truth. But here's the deal. It's truth and grace. It's not truth or grace. So I want to tell you before we go on what a truth teller isn't. Let's set this straight. A truth teller isn't. Have you ever had anybody come running up to you, big smile on their face, right? They're going to tell you what you did wrong, and they're going to like it, right? And they usually have a list of things, and they're like, yeah, gotcha, I gotcha, when they confront you, right? Now, those folks, they are not truth tellers. They are jerks. Okay, they're jerks. Folks who tell truth that way, usually it's out of a well of their own woundedness. It's out of their own brokenness. See, but people who tell us hard truths with grace, out of love, now those people can transform our lives. So here's the first reason that I need people to be my truth tellers, and you do too. Here's the first reason. Number one, they will help me hear truth that hurts. They will help me to hear truth that hurts. And as you fill in that blank, circle the word help. They will help me. Big word. They don't want to do me harm. These people want to help me. Read with me Proverbs 27:6 on the screen. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Yes, that's a good friend. That's a good friend who wounds us to help. You know, I'm blessed to have people like that in my life who wound me to help me, who can tell me the truth. And those people are named Pastor Patty, who's from the Sarasota campus of Grace Church, and Pastor Sherry from the Shores campus of Grace Church. These women are part of my small group. And we know everything about each other. In fact, I can't believe how many pictures of them I had in my phone when I was putting this together. I have dozens and dozens of pictures of them. And you know why? Because we're always together. We're always together. I know Sherry and Patty, they're the ones that when I need strength, they're going to lift me up. They're going to pour into me. But I also know that when I'm getting off track, they're the ones that are going to come pull me back in. They're going to rein me in. They're going to tell me the truth and put me back on the track. They keep me growing in faith. In fact, they don't even let me get away with the little things, because of the little things that grow into big things. Can I hear? Yeah. Mm-hmm. In fact, a couple of days ago, Sherry and I were working on a project together, and I was busy. You know, I only had a little bit of time, and she was brainstorming. She was being creative. She was thinking of all these things, and I'm like, come on, can we get on with it? Can we get on with it? Come on, like, I got to get out of here. And she just stopped. And she looked at me and she goes, you know, you're really bossy. Don't you know that? You're really bossy. And you know what? Yeah, she's right. She's right. I mean, see, Sherry's close enough to me. She knows that I have control as an issue, right? So after that little helpful burst of truth, the project, I got to tell you, went a lot better after that. I want to tell you about another truth teller that I know of. My daughter, Amy, she's a junior in college in Iowa now, but when she was 5 years old, Amy started taking piano lessons from Dan Dauber, who we called Mr. Dan. There's his picture. Hi, Mr. Dan. Mr. Dan went on to be with Jesus last year, and we miss him, but here's part of what his obituary said. It said his students became his extended family. He loved them as his own. He truly enjoyed watching his students grow into young, successful adults, making their own way and being a part of those journeys. Isn't that a wonderful obituary? I want people to say things about me like that, but it was great obituary. But that wasn't Amy's experience of Dan. No, not week to week. Amy took piano with Dan for 7 years, and she hated every single minute of it. And you know what? It wasn't Dan she hated. It was the piano. She hated the piano. She hated the piano so much that she would sob and she would cry and she would complain at every single lesson. And Dan would patiently try to teach her scales and teach her how to read music. Well, one week when Amy was about 8 years old, so we were about 3 years into this torture by now, okay? I was sitting there with her watching yet another agonizing piano lesson take place. Amy was doing what she always did, sitting at the piano, crying and sobbing, bucking against something Mr. Dan was trying to teach her. When Mr. Dan sat back in his chair, folded his arms, and said, "Amy, stop playing, stop playing." And then he delivered to her this statement. He said, "Amy, do you know what the worst day of my week is? The day that I look forward to the least, the one I look forward to the least. Do you know what the worst day of my week is?" And Amy said, "I don't know, Mr. Dan. What is the worst day? What is the worst day?" And I was so afraid. I was like, oh no, is he going to go there? He went there. He went there. He went there. He said, "The worst day of my week is the day that I have to teach the piano to you." And Amy sobbed even louder as Dan told her how frustrating it was for him to have a student who was so talented and had so much potential be so lazy and so stubborn, and how much more fruitful it would be for her and how much less painful for everybody involved it would be if she would just do what he said. Well, you can only imagine that car ride home that day, right? I won't tell you about it. Do you know Amy took piano with Mr. Dan for 4 more years after that? And I know that Dan appreciated the day when, right before he died, he received a letter from Amy thanking him for being such a truth teller that day, because that simple act of truth telling had helped her become the accomplished and disciplined pianist that she is today. Today she's a worship leader, she's a choir director, she's a theater music director, and it was because of being willing to work hard and learn, which is what Mr. Dan was sharing with her. See, Dan wanted to help her with the truth because he cared about her. You know, wounds from a friend can be trusted. Mr. Dan was Amy's friend. Do you have a Mr. Dan? Do you have a Mr. Dan? I hope you have a Mr. Dan, because everybody needs a Mr. Dan. I need a lot of Mr. Dans. I need Pastor Sherry and Patty, and I need my husband, and I need Wes and George and other friends. I need Mr. Dans. Who is your Mr. Dan? Get yourself a Mr. Dan. He can help you hear the truth that hurts. And here's the second reason I need truth tellers in my life, and you do too. They'll help me hear truth that heals. They'll help me hear truth that heals. Because the whole point of listening to truth tellers is so that we can experience healing and change from the thing that they're telling us the truth about. Read this with me, Proverbs 12, 17, 18 on the screen. An honest witness tells the truth, but a false witness tells lies. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. See, Nathan saw what lust and power and fame was doing to David, and he wanted him to heal from those. Do you know that in Greek, the same word for healing is the word redeemed? Redeemed. Nobody is beyond God's redemption. There's nobody who's breathing air today who's so far gone that they can't be redeemed and saved and healed by Jesus. Nobody is beyond the saving grace of Jesus. Everybody, every person can be saved and rescued, delivered and healed and redeemed. And friend, if you feel that something that you have done has put you outside the realm of God, outside the reach of God, you are wrong, dead wrong, because full salvation, full healing, full redemption can be yours. You see, Nathan wanted to redeem David. The Apostle Paul wanted to heal and redeem Peter from his brokenness. Mr. Dan wanted Amy's fight about being stubborn and about being so lazy to be done. Wanted her to be redeemed from that, because sin brings us further and further away from God. But Jesus is always calling and pulling us in. And you know who he uses to pull us in? He uses those truth tellers in our lives to help us to heal and become once again the people God intended us to be. But here's the deal. You can hear a truth all you want, but the healing from the truth is lost unless we actually decide to do something about it. You see, that's what King David did when Nathan called him out and told him the truth. David repented of his sins, and he turned back to God, and that's what made that murderer and adulterer a man after God's own heart. His healing redemption came from actually changing. You know, Peter took the truth that the Apostle Paul told him and changed his ways, and he grew into the rock upon which the church of Jesus was built. Amy, she swallowed hard, and she listened to Mr. Dan, and she found that she could love and flourish at the piano if she just practiced and stopped fighting. So around 1990, over 27 years ago, I moved here to Florida. And I'm in recovery. I'm in the program of AA. I've been for a lot of years. I had to find new AA meetings and new places to meet. And this was very hard for me because I am an extreme introvert. And so it's hard for me to meet people. And I had no friends. And my problem is I also have pride and ego. So even though I was lonely and had no friends, I also had to pretend it didn't matter, right? So I used to go to meetings, and I used to complain all the time. I'd raise my hand and say, oh, you people in Florida don't do AA like the people in California. California has good AA, and Florida has bad AA. And then everybody would go out to Perkins after the meeting, and they wouldn't invite me, go figure. Right? I'd be in the corner, and I'd pretend none of it was bothering me. But I was lonely. I was really unhappy inside, but I was pretending I wasn't. Well, this went on for several months. And finally one day, after a meeting, I was sitting in the corner as usual, off by myself, muttering about how cliquey all these Florida AA people are. When a girl came over and said, hey, do you want to go out to Perkins for coffee? And I was like, well, all right, I'll go. Yay! So I went, and I had such a good time. I will always remember the time that I had that day. Because it was just, everybody was so friendly, and we were laughing, and we were getting to know each other, and it just felt like I was at home. And that girl took me aside during that time that we were having fun, and she said, you know, the reason we never invited you out to coffee before is because you always act so stuck up. You act like you don't care about anyone. You complain. We figured you didn't want to get to know us. You act like you're better than everyone. And I was aghast. I was like, no, that's not how I was. I was feeling lonely. I was shy. I was unhappy. That's not how it was at all. And she said, well, Arlene, it would do you well to make your outsides look like your insides feel. And you know, it's been 27 years since then, and I have never forgotten her honest words spoken to help me and to heal me. Because when I want to pretend that my situations are better than they are because of my pride and ego, when I want to try to act like everything is okay when it's not, when my pride and ego kicks up and I want to pretend that I have it all together when in reality I'm really falling all apart, I remember her words. And I remember to make my outsides look like my insides feel so people can know and care about me and help me. See, that girl helped my redemption from the agonizing sin of pride and ego along. I'm not cured of it, but she helped it along. God used her for my redemption. And that simple bit of truth changed me forever. I'm grateful. You know, this whole Circle Up series has been about letting relationships with others help you to grow closer to Jesus and experience his freedom. It's about letting the truth tellers set you free. The disciplers can set you free. The mentors can set you free. Your friends will set you free. They will all help you to live fully into your identity and your calling. They'll set you free from your sin and pain. They'll help you to become more like Jesus. You know, when you came in today, in your worship folder, you were given a little card that looks like this. You can take this home, but why don't you take it out right now? You know what it is? It's a prayer that the Apostle Paul, Peter's Truthteller, the Apostle Paul, prayed in Ephesians 3:14 through 21. We've adapted it into a prayer for us today. I want this to be our prayer together, to wrap up the series, where we can ask the Lord to transform us and invite Jesus to set us free, to know him better and to love him more, to grow to be more like him. And so let's stand together today and let's pray this prayer in unity with one another together. Father, I pray that from your glorious, unlimited resources, you will empower me with inner strength through your Spirit. Then Jesus will make his home in my heart as I trust in him. Let my roots grow down into your love and keep me strong. Lord, may I have the power to understand, as all your people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep your love is. May I experience the love of Christ, though it's too great to understand fully. Then I will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from you. Now all glory to you, O God, who is able, through your mighty power at work within me, to accomplish infinitely more than I might ask or think. Glory to you in the church and in Christ Jesus through all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Friends, do you want to be empowered with inner strength? Say yes. Do you want Jesus to make his home deep inside of you? Say yes. Do you want to trust in him? Say yes. Do you want his roots to grow down deep into your life? Say yes. Do you want to be kept strong in him? Say yes. Do you want to experience the love of Christ? Say yes. Do you want to be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God? Say yes. You know, Andy Stanley says, to grow spiritually, you have to be connected relationally. Friends, do you know I'm the answer to your prayer? Oh, and you're the answer to my prayer. Do you know this prayer we've prayed? We're the answer to it together. We simply must circle up. Pastor George said it in week 1 of this series. He said, no matter how wonderful these rows are, and they are wonderful, truly, miracles most often happen in circles rather than rows. It is time to circle up. The altar is going to be open. Come if you need somebody to pray with you, lift a hand. Come and consider your next step for connecting with God and other people here at Grace Church. The altar is open.